This week on Culture Leaders, I sat down with Mike Dolen, the founder and CEO of Humancore, an AI-powered platform designed to help managers lead better in real time. Mike has spent his career at the intersection of people, science, and performance. With experience at LinkedIn, Glint, and CEB, he's seen the pattern over and over. We know what makes great leadership, but we rarely embed it into how work actually gets done. In our conversation, we talk about how Humancore is flipping the learning model on its head, using generative AI and organizational psychology to offer instant, contextual, and personalized leadership support. Mike shares why he believes this could be the end of dipping managers in training and the beginning of something far more practical and effective. We also explore big questions around AI's role in the future of work, emotional authenticity, and whether people might actually prefer reporting to a chatbot. Mike doesn't dodge any of it. His insights are thoughtful, challenging, and refreshingly grounded. This is a bold and timely conversation about leadership technology and the human side of change. Please welcome to the podcast, Mike Dolen. Mike Dolen, thank you for joining us. What is your why?
My why? I thought about this. There's actually a few elements to it. First, my journey into the space started with a deep curiosity about how people work, how people lead, and how does that relate to a person's ability to thrive in organizations. That led me to the field of industrial and organizational psychology, immersed myself in the science of human behavior at work. I started my career in large companies like the Home Depot, United Airlines, and Delta Airlines as a member of and leader of org effectiveness teams and talent management, where I saw firsthand the way companies lead and develop people and that direct impact on their success, the engagement levels of teams, and ultimately the strengths of their cultures. Along the way, I kept coming back to the same fundamental challenge. We have decades of research on what makes leaders and teams effective, but we haven't truly embedded that knowledge into the way that organizations operate, at least not on a sustainable basis. The second thing is I've always believed that great leadership transforms not just companies, but people. And I've seen firsthand how leaders can elevate a team, unlock potential, and create an environment where people thrive, not just produce. Along the way, I guess the third element is I've seen gaps in traditional HR and leadership tools where there's too many leaders who just want to do their very best, but they're often flying blind and their organizations don't support them in the way that they need to be supported. Fourth, I've watched great talent get overlooked, especially when it comes to who we choose as leaders. And many organizations are still rewarding confidence over competence. And then I guess the last thing is I deeply believe that work should be more than just a paycheck. It should be a place where people grow, contribute, and feel valued. The reality is that, as workers, we spend over a third of our waking lives at work. I think the recent study was 90,000 hours over a lifetime, and that more than half of our adult relationships are work relationships, meaning that our workplace experience doesn't just impact productivity, impacts our mental health, our relationships, and even our sense of self and purpose. So all of those things come together into my why, which is how can we marry revolutionary technology with modern forms of people science to help organizations and, importantly, all of their people thrive.
Okay, that's a lot. So you have a solution in the form of Humancore.
Yeah, we have a solution to help with a considerable portion of that, yeah.
So tell us about the solution. I mean, these are the challenges as old as time in leadership development and organizational effectiveness. So if you have the silver bullet, do tell.
I guess as a backdrop, we started, with our idea of what we wanted to do. We wanted to use the very latest in technology, and with the advent of generative AI, possibilities today are much different and much greater than they were just a couple of years ago. And we knew we wanted to do something where, everyone on the leadership team has 25, 30 years experience in helping solve people-related problems. So we had an idea of what we wanted to do. But we started by, several months of market research where we went out and asked CHROs, chief learning officers, heads of leadership development, what is the number one problem you have right now? What is the most critical job families that you're trying to solve for? And what we heard coming back loud and clear was the job of manager has gotten immensely more difficult. It's always been difficult. There's no debating that. As people manage up and down and sideways in the organization, they're oftentimes doing so as individual contributors. But recently there's been a couple of more than a couple of years, almost a decade of things that confluence that has made the job even more difficult. As organizations seek greater efficiency, they've stripped out layers of management. Recently there's been more layoffs than in recent history. I think in February the numbers were just released, and it's astounding. And it's not all just related to government efficiency. A third of it is, but 2/3 isn't. So, managers are doing more than they ever have before. Their teams have gotten larger, 3 times larger than they were just 7 years ago. And the needs of their teams are immensely more complex than they used to be. It's no longer just give me what I'm supposed to do and help me do it better. It's now help me manage my career, help me balance work life issues, help me grow. So all of these things, it's not just more people, it's more complexity of people with generations in the workforce, and the needs of tending to each individual have been greater and greater. It's what we consistently heard. And as we asked, what are you currently doing to solve for those needs? We kept hearing, well, we provide them with digital learning solutions. Some organizations, try and extend coaching below the executive levels down to a further penetration in organizations. There's a bunch of things, but what kept coming back was it seems like organizations hear of a problem that managers are facing, and the natural inclination is, okay, let's send them to training, or let's give them another video course to consume. And when we talk to hundreds of managers, they're saying, I don't want to be dipped in training. What I want is advice as to how to do my job better in the moment. I don't want to wait 2 months for my next coaching session. I don't want to wait 3 months until the next leadership development program. I want a piece of advice as to what I can do right now. And that's what we're doing at Humancore is we're leveraging generative AI, but we're laying on expertise in management science to help optimize that advice for people. Optimize in a couple of different ways, one of which is it's personalized. So if you go to a large language model or off-the-shelf LLM, you essentially have personalization that's done theoretically. It remembers the conversations you've had to date, and it tries to learn a little bit about who you are. We take a very intentional approach to that, which is a measurement of the 6 primary personality variables to attune it to the user as well as that user's team. So if I'm a manager of a team of 5, I can also have my team members take that same less than 10-minute assessment to get really accurate signal on the top 6 personality variables. So personalized advice is one aspect of it. The second is expert. If you use a large language model, you have expertise that comes from everything on the intranet. And I think we can all agree that that's not necessarily the best source of advice or the corpus of information that is necessarily the most robust. So we layered on a couple of streams of research to determine what are the areas in which managers need to be proficient, and then what are the best sources of advice using evidence-based management principles to determine the expertise resident in each of our artifacts. So that's the second is expertise. And then the third, critically for large enterprise organizations, is it needs to be in the proper context. So, one of the beautiful things about AI is the process of retrieval augmented generation is pretty simple. So we can take things such as a company's mission, vision, values, their leadership handbooks, their leadership frameworks, and make sure that the advice is rendered in a way that matches the expectations and policies and procedures that managers have to abide by. So this is a bit of a rambling answer, but we're providing a real-time expert advisor, AI-based, for managers to solve their problems in the moment with those 4 primary pillars of personalization, expertise, contextualization, and then, of course, the ever-present issue of safety and security as it comes to AI solutions.
Okay, so what does it look like in reality? I'm a manager. My company's bought your solution. I have a little chatbot. Is that it?
Yeah, it's a chat-based interface. The onboarding process, in order to optimize for personalization, you start with a quick 10-minute onboarding in which you answer a few demographic questions such as the function you're part of and your job role and your tenure and things like that. You take 7 quick interview questions that have very accurate signal against the top 6 personality dimensions. And then you're right into the chat where you can ask it virtually anything, whether it's how to have a difficult performance conversation with someone on your team, how to motivate people in times of change, real world scenario questions that managers would ask in a chat interface.
Okay, so my reaction as a manager would be, it's another app I got to use, right? I mean, there's so many things we already use, Monday and Slack and Smartsheet and Outlook, and add to the list, right? And now I've got also a chat bot that I have to remember to use that then takes time. And I know it's AI, so I know I'm talking to a non-person. So I'm resistant to change. Do I want to go ask a robot how to have a conversation with a human? How have you seen people embrace or resist the idea as managers?
Yeah, great question. So it is another interface for them to use. What we saw in a pilot across, a few dozen organizations is that at first people get used to the interaction and get used to using it. We start with a couple of quick videos to show people how it's commonly used. We have suggested tiles, if you will, where people can see commonly asked questions. The future iteration we're going to have here, in your organization, here are the top topics that people are asking about to help ease that unfamiliarity that people have with AI chatbots. But, recent data also shows that the vast majority of Americans, at least, it's fairly common that they interact with some of the large language model chatbots out there. So I think it's becoming rapidly less of an issue of user adoption or a learning curve because it's relatively simple to engage with it. And there's a lot of psychological research that also shows people are far more willing to open up with non-humans than they are with a human, where there may be some additional fear of judgment or something like that.
So what's the top 3 questions that people would type in your pilot?
We focus heavily on providing expertise from a personalized perspective. So a lot of what comes in is people-related issues, such as I need to motivate my team, and we're going through rapid change here. And if you consider the number of organizations going through significant transformation, we saw a lot of questions like that coming in our pilot, which is, hey, we're going through a lot of change. How do I keep everyone's eye on the ball while not letting them get distracted by the anxiety of what might happen in the future? A second iteration or a second channel of common questions is more about, how do I get more from my people? I have someone who's underperforming. I need to give them feedback. How do I do that constructively and make sure that they're not defensive, but rather they take it on board and improve in the future? Those are the common categories. They're people-related issues, either dealing with change and how to get people focused on the right objectives, or sharing feedback to help someone improve his or her performance.
Is this an ethical gray area about, I wrote a newsletter many months ago called AI-Powered Empathy, and it's the idea that it's telling me what to say, and then I'm saying that thing, and then I'm producing this persona that really understands change management and transformation and knows how to have a difficult conversation, when in reality, I don't. And so I've somehow hoodwinked my colleagues into believing that I am different than I am by leaning on AI to translate what it is I'm trying to say.
Yeah. That's one way of viewing it for sure, which is, it's, I guess the cynical view on that would be, I'm not really doing something that's natural to me or is not authentic to me. But the counter side of that would be that, this is what I want to achieve. I have my ideas of how I want to do it. Help me streamline or help me knock the rough edges off of that and do it in a way in which I want to do it. So, with something that is, If you just went out and asked an off the shelf LLM, how do I do this? And it gave you a generic piece of advice that you followed, that might seem a little inauthentic, but though the way that we incorporate the personalities and the people involved in it to say, hey, as you're having this conversation with Larry or Susan or whomever, realize that they might react to this negatively because of this aspect of their personality. And it's a little bit ironic in that, in some sense, we're using AI to help people be more human in many ways by understanding the way in which they're about to say something is going to impact someone in a particular way. And it surfaces that information or that awareness for them before they go into that conversation. So while there is a cynical side where it's like, hey, you're not authentic, that's not the way you would say it, it's really giving people advice. If you're trying to achieve that based on the personalities and the people involved, here's the best way in which you can go about that. And our feeling is that better personal interactions, whilst they might not come up with that on their own, better personal interactions far outweighs any perception of potential inauthenticity.
Okay, I could see that. I mean, I guess if I were just to ask a mentor how I should handle a conversation, and then if I took their advice, it's still me using someone else's ideas. In this case, my mentor is a chatbot, right?
In some ways, if I can just play off that a little bit, in some ways, one of the things we heard is from both managers themselves as well as learning professionals is managers would say things like, I need to have that difficult performance conversation tomorrow, right? Just that very same scenario that I portrayed there. The organization's natural response to it is, okay, here's this course that you can go consume and then magically try and figure out which aspects of it apply in this particular situation. And when you look at some of the very real statistics out there around adoption of digital learning solutions, the utilization of coaches, the attendance at that internally developed leadership development programs, all of those numbers are fairly low, much lower than the owners of those programs would want. And when we ask managers why, again, they come back to, I'm just looking for advice as to how to do that effectively. And if you lean into what usually happens is they say, oh, I don't have time to go search through a couple hundred videos to find the right one. I'm going to go ask someone for advice. Just like you just said, I'm going to go ask my mentor for advice, and he or she is going to render their opinion to you. And then you have to figure out which elements make sense for me and how you craft that into your own story. Very much the same with Humancore. You go ask for advice. The difference is, whereas your mentor might not know the other people involved, they might be biased in your favor because they know you and they are trying to help you along in your journey, as compared to an objective solution like Humancore, where it does know the other people involved and it helps you with advice that takes in that into consideration. It also understands your unique organization's context. Your mentor might know that, or a friend might know that, but they're going to have their own biased view of that. So in many ways, the Humancore advisor is much more objective than a mentor or a friend. They're definitely as clued in as asking your boss for advice, because oftentimes what we heard is, a lot of the questions I'm going to ask the Humancore advisor are about my boss. I can't necessarily go and say, my boss is a jerk. How do I deal better with him or her? So the objectivity, the understanding of the situation, and the understanding of the personalities involved oftentimes relates in better advice than even from a trusted mentor.
Okay, so from your perspective, what is AI's impact on the future of work?
That's a huge question. So in our particular use case, we're trying, as our name implies, we're trying to put humans at the core of AI, right? By using personality information, by using contextual information about what's expected of people. We're trying to use AI as a way to surface great advice for people in doing their jobs. There's a very interesting, fascinating debate going on around, is AI going to replace people? Are managers going to be needed in the future? Is it automation versus augmentation? Anyone, I think, who says, here's the future and answers that definitively is probably either trying to sell you something or trying to make you think they know something that they actually don't. We don't know what that future looks like. Our particular advantage is the way in which we're using it is to augment the capabilities that people have and help them become better versions of themselves and be better leaders in leading their teams.
So does this then create more efficiency? I mean, we've all seen the downfall of the middle manager, right? The increased expectations, the increased span of control. These layoffs have been targeting management layers primarily because organizations feel they can be more efficient. So now if we become even more efficient in how we work with our teams, does it simply create more opportunity to reduce that layer even more in the future?
Yeah, I mean the chicken and the egg debate on that one is fascinating. I would say that in many ways it's already happening, and organizations don't necessarily have a firm logic as to how work will be done given the reductions, right? So big companies recently, Amazon, Google, Citigroup, whomever, have slashed managerial positions, expecting those left behind to pick up the slack. They might have really good strategies for how to do that. They may have had bloated managerial ranks. I don't know. But organizations are cutting positions already without clearly discernible plans of how that efficiency or how that work gets done. This is an efficiency play for sure. Over the last 6 years, I think managerial spans of control have tripled, and managerial ranks have gone down by 6%. So there's fewer people doing bigger jobs. So the efficiency requirement is there. Is this going to make it possible to thin the herd, so to speak, even more? Potentially, but I would, one stream of thought is that that's going to happen anyway. So there needs to be an efficiency gain solution in place. It just happens that the one we have does allow people to be more efficient by augmenting their capabilities, not replacing them as leaders.
Well, and I would imagine a threat to your ability to grow and your market share is agentic AI, which theoretically, according to Workday and Lattice and many other large technology companies, can eventually replace supervisors altogether by being the supervisor, so to speak, especially if it has the ability as it does to contextualize within the organization and then understand psychological profiles through testing. Do you see that as a threat?
I wouldn't necessarily categorize it as a threat. If that proves to be the reality that comes true, then, whether Humancore develops a strategy for dealing with that, or if we don't, is one thing. But I think that would be a undesirable future for organizations if they completely eradicated what most people find as one of the more compelling elements of their work experience, which is the personal relationship they have with coworkers and their boss. I haven't seen any data that shows that people are excited to follow machines, but they get really excited to follow authentic, passionate individuals. So, a lot of the work that I see, or a lot of the new products coming out, are suggesting things like, hey, we can automate your performance reviews. And we look at that and we say, it sounds like a partially terrible idea to take away the one of the most valuable, true personal interactions that they have, either once a year, twice a year, quarterly, what have you, where they feel like they're getting treated like a fellow human and getting authentic and really meaningful feedback on what it is they can do better. So there are some things that AI and the agentic AI will eradicate, and it'll be great because people don't have to, quote unquote, push papers like they had to. But there are certain aspects of work that are still distinctly human, and to remove humans from that equation seems like a relatively bad idea in a number of ways, in terms of engagement levels, the culture within an organization, and some of those aspects that are uniquely human that would suffer dramatically if they were just done by bots.
This is an interesting conversation. Let me play devil's advocate without assuming that I agree with what I'm about to say, because I don't know yet, although I'm intrigued by my thoughts. Okay. You said earlier in this conversation that there's psychological data that suggests people can feel more open with chatbots than people because of these other layers of ego, fear, power, influence, et cetera, that exist, judgment, fear of judgment, et cetera, with people. We've also seen that with accountability, that it is easier to be held accountable or to hold others accountable when the other is AI in some form, because there's no judgment of I look bad. There's no pride within that transaction. It's simply transactional. So, and we also know that people leave companies because they leave managers, and we are at an all-time low of employee engagement and attrition, and these, culture by and large right now out there needs work across the board, largely because of human complications, emotional human complications. And so would I like reporting into an AI chatbot more than my boss who has mood swings and who sometimes is in a good mood, sometimes isn't, sometimes disagrees with me and doesn't see that what I did was actually perfectly aligned with the strategy? Whereas with an AI chatbot, it's less emotional, frankly.
So a couple of things that would need to be true in order for that to be sort of the direction of the future would be that all managerial capabilities are lacking, which clearly isn't the case. We often hear of the extreme ends of that, and the data supporting that people leave managers is true. But if you look at the speed with which people are quitting, it hasn't necessarily elevated to never before seen levels either. So people leave bad managers, very true. And people often cite my manager as the single biggest source of stress at work, right? That's one of the most recent compelling stats to come out of Gallup and as well as Microsoft Viva. All of those are true, but that doesn't mean that applies to everyone. It's still, I think, more of the exception than it is the rule. Would people feel more happy or would they like reporting to an AI bot more than a person? It might go that direction over time. I don't know. I don't see that being the case in the near future, but I might be surprised by that. I'm not claiming to be the expert on that particular topic. But I would be kind of surprised if people said, yeah, I want to report to an AI chatbot versus having someone with whom I can engage in meaningful conversation. Someone who gets to know me personally, even if it is aided by some assessment that I took that's helping them make sense of things in real time. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But, removing humans from that equation sounds like a more distal direction or journey than I think is what's likely to be the case in the near future. But I could be wrong in that.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose it depends on your personality and what moves you. I think some people can be inspired and moved by leaders, and others want a 9-to-5 paycheck job, and they find their fulfillment elsewhere, not in work. And they find it at church, they find it in their community service, they find it with their family, whatever. I was talking about this last night, actually, with my boyfriend. His father was this incredible author and was someone who was very convicted, and the work that he did had meaning in that it was a contribution to the world. And then my boyfriend is an attorney and he works for a technology company. And I don't think he feels that same level of meaning in the work that he's contributing to the world, but he likes his colleagues, he likes his boss, and he likes his paycheck. So he's perfectly fine not changing the world with his work. In the small world that he exists, he's doing enough to feel like it's impactful. And the paycheck allows him to then put his energy into his family and his community service. I wonder about that too. I mean, I think I like the idea of making a huge contribution in the world, which is probably why I am in the role that I'm in. And sometimes it's very emotionally taxing because it means confronting people who are doing the wrong thing and trying to shift their perspective and meeting change resistance and getting naysayers who think that I'm full of it and who tell me how wrong I am. And, all of that can also be emotionally draining, which leaves me sometimes depleted when I want to hang out with my daughter. And sometimes I long for the days of just phoning it in for a good paycheck and not needing to be fulfilled at work. I almost wonder if we're barking up the wrong tree with some of the people, right? Some of the people, they need that. Other people, they don't. And this is where I think the AI and the future of work gets interesting, because I don't mind getting feedback from an AI chatbot. I use ChatGPT all the time, and I'm like, I have this idea. What could be better? And then they tell me, and I'm like, that's brilliant, right? I don't ask my colleagues for feedback as much as I ask ChatGPT for feedback, because I have an insecure ego. I feel like I will have exposed my weakness or whatever, right? The same thing that we all do.
Yeah.
So I think this is just something to watch. I'm very curious about, with the companies that did your pilot, what was the longer term impact that they experienced?
Well, longer term impact, I wouldn't say that we did anything that would allow us to demonstrate the long term impact, right? It was a 2-month pilot in which we were more looking at what were users' feedback related to the quality of the advice, all the basics of using a new platform, like was the interaction simple and easy to use, and things of that nature. Your question of would people be happier, just to continue on that a little bit, because he said something that made me think of it. I spent a lot of my career in the employee listening space, or the employee engagement space, right? Leading a business in Exxon at CEB, and then, being a member of the founding executive team at a company called Glint. A lot of working with thousands of companies in that space. And we would, when looking at what drives engagement levels, and, there's, not to get into the debate of whether engagement is the metric or not, right? I know you have an even more recent version of what you're advocating people look at beyond engagement. But if you're just looking at what is it that causes someone to care more, try harder, and stay longer, right? If that's the outcome, regardless of how you define it, all of the statistics that look at what drives those outcomes most of them are related to a couple of key things. One, the work itself. Do I have meaningful and challenging work that I'm able to do? 2, do I enjoy the people with whom I work, the colleagues, my boss, senior leaders, etc.? And then the third aspect is just like, is it easy to do my job? Or do I have to follow these ridiculous requirements? Do I have the tools and technology to do my job, etc.? That's sort of what the statistical data show you. But when you look at written comments, hundreds of thousands of them, and then when you actually do focus groups and ask people, what is it that you like most about working here? The thing that makes me think it's going to be difficult to have AI step in and start replacing people is the number one thing I would hear at all 3 of those different companies across thousands of clients is, I love the people I work with. And it just comes out consistently. What's the best part of working at your organization? The people. When you ask people who are leaving, what are you going to miss the most? My people, my coworkers, my boss, my friends. So, just looking at the data itself in terms of what people value in the world of work right now, at least within large organizations, those with over 3,000 people, it's largely the people that make the difference. So, maybe in some fields, like you were saying, if someone is more of a gig worker or something, they've made choices based on where they derive satisfaction in their life, that work is a part of that, but it's not that large of one. They want they want the paycheck so they can afford to do other things. In that situation, I think we'll see AI replacing managers or leaders more rapidly than in the vast majority of organizations. But until AI becomes incredibly personal and more likable than some of your colleagues, that might be a distant future for us. Of course, then you could ask the question about, what about the movie She, or what about the recent research of this person who fell in love with ChatGPT? And it is becoming increasingly authentically human, but it's a curious question to wonder how quickly they'll become leaders or managers. I just don't know.
Or maybe I'm just antisocial and I like the idea of reporting it to a chatbot.
Could be.
You
Yeah.
know, maybe it's just my distorted perspective. I am the people. I'm interested in exploring that because I get that the people are. I feel like connection is ultimately what makes us human. And even when I was a wee lad and I had no idea about anything, I remember thinking when I won this award, what's the point in winning an award if you don't have someone to celebrate having won the award with, right? It's all about sharing experiences. Having said that, the workplace is a construct that does not allow for totally organic relationships to emerge, right? I mean, in my life, I have real friendships and real relationships with people. And I understand that none of the friends I have are better than me or worse than me. But in the workplace, there are bosses and there are people who report into those folks. There's power dynamics, there's hierarchical structures, there's responsibility that is that you have to be accountable for. There's competition internally, right? So here I am next to my peer. We're both marketing assistants. There's only one marketing manager job, and I got to win against this person who I'm supposed to collaborate with. It's a competitive slash collaborative environment that makes all of that really complicated. So I find it really hard to have authentic relationships at work. And I think managers struggle with that too, because there is this unspoken reality, which is we're not fully at liberty to act who we really are. The whole bring your authentic self to work, but only if it's socially acceptable and also professional in nature, right? So I have to wheel back. I mean, I get yelled at for cursing all the time and I curse all the time. So then I get viewed as unprofessional. And so I have to silence myself and work on not cursing, even though it's not really natural for me because I grew up in a cursing household. It's just the way that I am, right? So how authentic are work relationships really?
It's a great question. And I found myself smiling as you're describing that, because before this, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to like this, how to get people to give a shit, your TED talk. I'm just like, perfect. This is more my style, right? It's authentic for me to potentially curse like that as well. And, the how authentic are relationships? At the onset, I think people are more guarded, right? And there's a mountain of research showing that people are extremely guarded in work situations. And it's only the passage of time and the increased amount of interactions that erodes the worriness from, can you be your true self? And organizations that say, we want you to bring your authentic self to work. And I saw you and Josh Burson talking about this too, which is, it's a noble thing. And, do leaders act that way? Well, no, it's difficult for them to open up and share about themselves because they don't want to share stories that are or notably different than what, just the average worker is sharing. So it creates an even more artificial barrier when you tell people to be authentic and bring your whole self to work, but yet you have these power dynamics and guidelines that makes it even more uncomfortable than if you didn't ask people to do that. I guess the way that we see it and what we're trying to do with our product is we're giving information about how to interact effectively with one another, right? How can a manager have better interactions with his or her employees? How can an employee themselves respond better to their coworkers? So helping them say, hey, if you're going to be more authentic, if you're going to be sharing more about yourself, here are some suggestions of how to do it based on the audience with whom you're having that interaction. So it's not so much a leap of faith or that risk of saying, can I really feel safe about this? Or can I really interact in how I am at home? Can my work self match my private self a little bit more? So just giving people greater awareness to that very, risk-filled endeavor, I think is a noble thing for a platform to be able to do. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but if people are trying to forge better work relationships, getting information about how to do that more effectively seems like it would be of benefit to everyone involved, not just the person wondering whether they can truly be themselves or not, or the person on the other side of that, which is here's this person sharing things that I'm not comfortable sharing about myself, just decoding that a little bit and making it a little bit, making it go a little bit better, hopefully improves at what the objectives that everyone's gunning for.
Well, this is very interesting. So the people that you are definitely putting out of business is L&D departments, right? And the vendors that they hire to train their leaders, is that ultimately who you're going up against?
It's interesting because, one venture capital company with whom I spoke, I shared our brief story, and the automatic reaction was, "You're going to kill content." And I said, maybe. We can definitely see a path where there's a peaceful coexistence, right? Because one of the sources of information that we can ingest through retrieval augmented generation is all of the current coursework that they are receiving, either internally or externally from some of the large content providers. So if I'm asking a question about, hey, I need to have a contentious conversation, right? Go back to my initial example. I need to have this difficult performance conversation with Robert. Give me advice as to how to do that. In the Humancore advice is things such as, hey, you have strengths here, make sure you play to that. But Robert's expectations are this, make sure you don't slip past that. If you want to learn more, here are courses that your company has made available to you, and highlighting those either in their LMS or, through some of the third-party providers out there. So we actually think we can help optimize some of those current investments. When it comes to, we have limited dollars to spend, we can spend them with you or spend them elsewhere. I can see where there would be also a competitive element there.
Yeah, that's interesting that you would kill content. I mean, there's bias in what the chat bot spits out based on what you put into the contextualization part of this, right? I mean, are you putting in Culture Partners IP, which is experiences shaping beliefs, or are you putting in the Jack Welch type of management where you do stack ranking and you move up or move out? Whichever content you put in on the back end is going to spit out very different advice to the person asking for advice in the moment. And so then the question becomes, are they getting the high level understanding of why they're being suggested to speak in this way or make this? Because we've seen those studies that say that 70% of learning happens on the job, right? But if you're only getting on the job learning, then do you ever get to zoom out and understand why you asked a question before you asked it? Or is it making growth more tactical in nature instead of strategic?
Yeah. I think we would do organizations and the people within those organizations a disservice if we tried to replace the long arc of learning, right? Whether you're thinking of internally developed leadership development programs where you're helping people develop core capabilities over the long term. If you're talking about coaching, either executive coaching or even that delivered by some of the digital providers of the BetterUps or Torch, Coach Hub, Ezra's of the world, all of those what we consider long arc of learning type solutions are still fundamentally important to helping people develop in the long term. What we're trying to do isn't to replace the need for that or the benefits of having that in place, but rather answer the call that we heard loud and clear, which is, that's great. I do want to develop long term, but help me solve this problem I have. We're sitting here Thursday afternoon. I need to have something, whether that's a conversation or I need to do something, I need to present something. I need help tomorrow morning. That's different than help me learn something new. And our view is, doing something repetitively successful leads to learning on its own, but we're not trying to, and we think would be a disservice to try and replace the long arc of learning.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I have one last question, which is my favorite question, which is, what is something you don't get asked very often in these types of interviews that you wish you were asked more often?
It's a great question. As I thought about this, because, just in preparing, you try and anticipate everything that's going to be asked. And it's like, well, what haven't I been asked that I should be prepared for? And then I ask myself, well, what would I want to be asked? I think the question is, we find ourselves in a very interesting point in corporate history, right? Where there's a bunch of things going well, but a bunch of things that haven't been working well. And our market research, shouted at us some of those things that aren't going well. So the question was really one, how did we actually get here? What are the driving influences that have conspired to result in the world of work that we find ourselves in which we have managers who are burnt out. We have development solutions that aren't utilized near to the level that anyone involved would want them to. And I found myself that the question is, how did we get to this point? What has happened to result in this sort of reality? And the way I think about it is there's a couple of things. One, there's actually three things. One, management as a discipline is a relatively new social contract, right? We've had leadership in place for thousands of years, but a lot of the early treatments of leadership, a lot of early studies of leadership were all either of a military foundation or of an organized religious foundation. But the social construct of management as a discipline is relatively new. It came out of the Industrial Revolution, where people like Frederick Taylor and time motion studies were coldly mechanical, right? And the outputs of that led to standardizing and controlling workers. And then you had the German sociologist Max Weber, who I think bureaucratic management is the best way to summarize his approach to it. And it was all about developing rational and efficient processes. So if that was the leadership model, it replaced trust with process and replaced autonomy with control. But all of that served as the historical foundation for management. And if you think about the second aspect that sort of results in where we're at today, I alluded to it earlier, but we keep promoting the wrong people into positions. And there's been great companies built on helping assess and helping companies hire the very best people. And it can work really well. But despite all of our findings over time, we're still in the same place. And if you think about decades of research, literally decades of research showing that women consistently outperform men on nearly every leadership competency, but yet they're grossly underrepresented in executive and leadership ranks. So it tells anyone who looks at those studies that we're still favoring assertiveness and dominance, those things that we think of as potentially as, really good leadership capabilities. We're still anchoring on those versus collaboration, adaptability, and other factors that actually drive great leadership skills. So if we've designed the very framework of management ineffectively, and if we're still picking the wrong people for the job more often than not, it's not surprising we got here. And then, the current thing that we've talked about quite a bit here today is the expanding role problem, right? The job of being a manager or leader has become virtually untenable, where it's no longer just tell me my job and help me do it better. It's be my coach, be my career developer, help support me with my mental health needs, culture building, DEI initiatives, all of these things making that job. It's not surprising that 50% of managers are feeling completely burnt out. And it's those three things, right? It's the foundation on which we establish the discipline of management. It's the way in which organizations sometimes still get hiring the right people wrong. And then the expanding role problem. It's an interesting time in corporate history with regards to how we get people performing at their best. And our focus at Humancore is how can we use revolutionary technology that wasn't available a few short years ago to help chip away at some of those factors that are causing this situation that a lot of people would say isn't very desirable.
Well, that is such a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you, Mike, so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate your time. And I'm just grateful that you were able to share your insights with us, and I wish you the best of luck.
Great. Thank you for your time.